Dear Minister, dear Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, we are very pleased to welcome you at this joint event of the Global Health Center at the Graduate Institute of Geneva and the Geneva office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation on lessons on global health cooperation from COVID-19, Germany's perspective. We are, of course, welcoming all of those present here, but also all of those who are following the event online virtually. As past experiences have demonstrated, the window of opportunity to take or maybe even learn the necessary lessons of a crisis is rather short. During the World Health Assembly in May, 3 independent reports have strongly urged for reform not only of the WHO, but also of global health cooperation in general. The crisis has shown deficiencies of global health cooperation, but we also witnessed, and let's not forget that, some examples of solidarity. And some countries have shown a genuine will for reform and to break with the business as usual, among them Germany. In these past years and also during the COVID crisis, Germany has shown leadership and commitment to global health cooperation. It played a crucial role, financially and politically, to support the WHO to combat the crisis. It is also spearheading reform efforts, urging for creating a sustainable finance basis for the WHO, but also urging for a more fundamental reform, which would include the conclusion of a pandemic treaty, for example. An idea which will be the focus of a special session of the World Health Assembly later this year. Thus, these months are really crucial to discuss the right lessons to take from the crisis, and we as the Geneva office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation are trying to accompany with our modest means this process. Therefore, we are very honored to welcome today the German Federal Minister of Health, Jens Spahn, who will outline the German perspective on the lessons for global health cooperation from a German point of view. I will not narrate his CV right now like a litany, but let me still highlight a few issues. Jens Spahn has been Minister of Health since 2018, but he has been also before, since 2002, a member of the German Parliament, of the Bundestag, and health has been a key topic for him almost through his entire time as a parliamentarian. Since 2005, he has been the chair of the CDU-CSU parliamentary group in the Committee of Health. He has been, since 2009, the Speaker for Health Politics of the CDU-CSU parliamentary group as well. And since 2014, the head for the CDU Party Committee on Health. Dear Minister, we are very honored that during this very busy day you took the time to talk to us about this very timely topic, and we are very much looking forward to your insights today. We will first do so in the form of a conversation with these 2 excellent moderators, Sueri Moon, as co-director of the Global Health Center, and Professor Ilona Kickbusch, founder and chair of the International Advisory Board at the Global Health Center. And in the second part, we will open up the debate to the entire audience, both those present here and virtually. But I think I've taken enough of your precious time, but still before giving the floor to the Minister, I would like to thank my colleagues Rosa and Sarah, but also the Global Health Center and the Graduate Institute for their really excellent cooperation in the preparation of this event and all their efforts. Dear Minister, dear Ilona, dear Sueri, the floor is yours.
So good afternoon. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, Your Excellencies, both here in the room and those that are with us online. The way we will run this, as you heard, first a conversation, then we ask you here online if you have any questions, and the people here in the room. So it's my great pleasure to start this conversation with the Minister. Minister, obviously you've been in Geneva a whole number of times during your work. We were wondering what exactly brought you to Geneva this time, What is the agenda of Germany now that is the largest donor of the World Health Organization? And to sort of, weave that into the conversation, what are your expectations of the reform at WHO as actually one of the largest donors? Could you share with us a little bit the agenda you had today with Dr. Tedros and the expectations that you have?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much, and thanks to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for setting this up here in Geneva. Actually, it's the first time after more or less 12 months I'm back here. Of course, we had many virtual discussions like we have today here again, or hybrid is now the new modus. But nevertheless, the visit here is to actually show Germany's commitment to the WHO, to underline it, to underpin it, just by, first of all, of course, being there, but at the same time by making a financial commitment too. As you just mentioned, Germany is the biggest donor in the biennium of 2020-21, almost $1 billion, which is a lot for Germany. And a lot for WHO. But actually what is important for us, and that is another reason actually to be here, to not to say, hey, look, we are the ones giving the most. That's actually not the main focus. The focus is to invite others to join us in this. Because what we see, I mean, we are still in the middle of this pandemic worldwide, definitely, and with the Delta variant in Europe actually back in some countries of Europe already in a fourth wave. We actually really see what difference international cooperation makes in a pandemic with a virus that knows no border. And we were already committed before this. The G20 Health Ministers track actually was founded by Germany during our presidency. The Chancellor herself is very much committed, the whole government, and the people are actually. There's broad support for this international engagement. And we have seen in this pandemic situation actually that it needs to be strengthened. Strengthened now in this crisis, and that is what the contributions are for, what the money is for, that it can be used to vaccine the people, to develop treatments, to actually support the emergency work of WHO. I just had a short discussion with Mike Ryan too, who is leading the contingency fund, the emergency actions of WHO, and the money is just helpful to make a difference now. And the second thing is, of course, mid and long term, we want to use the momentum now, and you need to use it while there's still the situation that everyone sees it is necessary to strengthen WHO. We want to use it to actually push reforms of WHO and to develop new instruments. And all of this brings me to Geneva.
Could you say a word or two more about the reforms you'd like to see?
Well, first of all, what I'd like to see and what I ask all fellow member states of the WHO is that we actually give the WHO the tools and the resources it needs to be able to actually address our expectations, to meet our expectations. We all do have high expectations of what WHO should do in this crisis and beyond. And at the same time, when it comes to funding, when it comes to really supporting WHO, there are at least differences, let me put it that way. And as it is now, this doesn't work. It starts with the mandatory funding, the fees, if you want to put it that way, and the contributions we all commit ourselves to as member states are much too low. WHO needs more flexible funding, more money that can be used for the organization itself and can be used flexible. What we see right now is, and I would not say that Germany is not part of it, of course we do it too, but there's too much money that is earmarked, that is there linked with a concrete project, a concrete task, idea, goal, that actually that is defined by the money giver, but actually that's not setting the WHO in the position to really act flexible. And the other one is governance and structures. What actually are the boards and how actually are they interlinked? How is the headquarter in Geneva interlinked, connected to the regional offices? Should there be more governance and coordination, or should there be less? That needs to be discussed. And what we are advocating for is actually a pandemic treaty, together with other states, that out of this we give a new foundation, treaty foundation to this action of the WHO. And at the core of that one, I would especially see the commitment for implementing international health regulation. It's not all of it, but a very important part of it. So from financing to governance to the basis or the foundation of the whole work of the WHO, it all, from our position, it all needs development, improvement.
Thank you. We'll come back to the treaty. I hand over to Suri now.
Thanks very much. First, I just want to thank you, Minister, for taking the time to join us. And one of the key components of our strategy at the Global Health Center is to open global health, and we very much appreciate that you're willing to be here to engage in an open exchange, both in person and online, with the broader global health community. Following up on this discussion about WHO, I think many of us, certainly I personally, have very much appreciated Germany's leadership in the pandemic, the support to WHO, the calls and very strong financial support for international cooperation at a time when that was really breaking down around the world. I think one of the areas where Germany has been particularly generous and active is in the financial support for the COVAX initiative for ensuring access to vaccines worldwide, as well as bringing the European Union countries together when, in the early days, it looked like the EU itself may fall apart, perhaps, in internal competition for vaccines. I would say one area where a lot of questions have come up, however, is, of course, around intellectual property and the TRIPS waiver, which is the proposal for temporary suspension of intellectual property on COVID-19 technologies. And this is one of the areas where there seems to be perhaps some kind of inconsistency or tension in Germany's policy. Would you agree with that characterization? And if not, how do you explain how these different strands come together?
Well, I find it actually very consistent what we do on this. Why? Because actually we try to put aside you could even call it ideological debate, because this debate on intellectual property, especially when it comes to drugs, vaccines, this debate is very old, and it's very ideological, fundamental, and it's not really, from my position, bringing us anywhere right now in this situation where we just need speed. So the actual goal is, what we are achieving for is that there is access for all citizens on the world to vaccines, to vaccination. And so the question is, how can we reach it in the fastest way? And that would be that's actually what we try to push for, to support, to make international cooperation happening. It's done by cooperation in the field of production and tech transfer. Why? We had, by the way, the very same debate at the beginning of this year when the German and the European vaccination campaign started, and at the very beginning, obviously, we did not have enough vaccines to just meet the need. And there was a discussion if we should even do it in Germany ourselves for our own campaign to give up on patent rights and intellectual property. And actually, it's the same argument. It's so complex to produce a vaccine. It's even in the discussion with President Ramaphosa, several times of South Africa, he mentioned the HIV drugs. And I absolutely understand the problems that were back then, but producing an HIV drug, once you have the API, is quite easy compared to producing a vaccine. So it's very complex. For that, you need technology transfer, you need expertise, you need the exchange of people to train each other. And from our point of view, this is always easier to be done on a voluntary base. If people want to cooperate, to enforce cooperation is always not a very productive cooperation. And so as long as the companies are willing to cooperate, and that is what we see, not just with AstraZeneca, but with the other companies too, and as long as we are really building up the capacities we need worldwide, and we are, I'm very sure next year we will have a surplus, an overcapacity of mRNA production in the world, which is good actually after just some months or a year. So if we can reach this goal without interfering with intellectual property rights, let's do it that way. And it is even quicker. That is actually the consistency of our argument is, let's do it in a way that we really reach what we want to reach.
If I may just follow up quickly. So I think it's now more and more known that Germany is a major contributor financially to WHO. It may not be as well known that Germany is the second largest public investor in vaccine research and development after the United States, for COVID-19, I should say. Do you think that in those investments, because there has been so much public money, German taxpayer money basically put into the innovation and also put into the purchase of vaccines, do we still need to think about intellectual property in the same way? And what is the responsibility of governments, of government funders in ensuring that the technology that is developed is widely available for use, particularly given the crisis that we're in?
Well, of course, with the money that was given by the government, by the people actually, it's their taxpayers' money, of course, there is the expectation that there is common sense by the researchers and the companies too. But I see that. By the way, mRNA technologies were not invented within months. This was research at least for a decade, if not longer, till it finally led to the first product. Actually, it was focused on cancer drugs. Now it's a vaccine as a first product. And for Moderna, CureVac, and BioNTech, it's the first product in their history and the first time they make profit in their history. Which is of course something we need to see. But for actually really these achievement that we just within months. We had a vaccine available. I mean, last year, 12 months ago, no one would have expected that already at the end of the year, there's a vaccine that really has shown efficacy and makes a difference. So for that, I'm still very grateful and kind of proud that it was developed in Germany too. But of course, there comes a responsibility with it. And that is why we say very clear we expect these companies to cooperate with others. And they do. I mean, BioNTech, Pfizer, they cooperate with companies in Asia, in Africa. There are talks ongoing. And as I said, there is capacity that is built up in a dimension no one really can think of today. But if all of these projects really lead to something, as I said, there will be an overcapacity next year or the year after latest that actually is to be expected. And the other thing is the pricing. Of course, we want and that is the policy they do as well. That there is a different price for developing countries. That there is a different price for COVAX compared to the price we pay. That is okay, and that is actually what we expect, and that it is what is done. So yes, there's public money in it that comes with some expectations, but I would say these expectations are met.
Are being met. I'm sure we'll get more questions on this later, so Ilona, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Some, of course, are expecting from the discussion of President Biden and Chancellor Merkel today in Washington, that some of also the controversial issues between the US and Germany in global health are also discussed. The TRIPS waiver is one of them. The other actually seems to be the treaty.
Yes, but there's, if I might,
yes.
There's one thing I keep on remembering our US friends of. And I mean, we had the same discussion, the G7 health ministers meeting, of course. And it's good to have that frank discussion. But I mean, it was the European Union from the very beginning that exported 50%, 50, not 15, 50% of the vaccines doses produced in the European Union were exported to other regions of the world from day one on. And so I'm very happy that the US and the UK feel that, or see it now too, that they should share with the world and we are grateful and it's appreciated. But actually, I would say we walked the talk by just exporting from the very beginning, while others just did not.
Thank you for that. And let's go to this other contentious issue between the two countries being, a pandemic treaty. And so, again, the European Union, of course, initiated the idea of a pandemic treaty. Germany is very much in support of it, as are a number of other heads of state. There was the op-ed that expressed that with about 25, 30 heads of state. There is the group of friends here in Geneva. There was the support of over 60 countries in trying to move this through the World Health Assembly. And actually, as we sit here, the member states are meeting to discuss this issue, as you know. Could you share with the audience a little bit more what are expectations of Germany of such a treaty? Some people say, you could do a lot of these things that people are talking about through existing instruments, through political declarations, through other kinds of mechanisms. Why go into this pandemic treaty mode, so to say? So what is it that made Germany say, no, we need a treaty?
Well, actually you said that there are some saying, and you mentioned that there are some saying political declaration could be made instead. And that's the problem, actually. There are too many declarations and too less implementation, especially when it comes to the WHO and the work and what member states really do making a difference. And this treaty, and I mean, one thing is the process itself. It's just important to discuss with the experience we all just made, and now with this pandemic, what this WHO is for all of us, but how do we see it? And this process of discussing the treaty is a process actually of refounding the WHO. And at the same time, it needs to be more binding. For example, the international health regulation. The truth is, and I would say that even counts for Germany. I mean, I was, because it was mentioned that I was in the health committee of the parliament, and I remembered when now the pandemic situation occurred and we were checking, and for the first time, our implementation law for the international health regulation really was used in Germany. And I was in parliament 10 years ago, more or less, when we discussed it and voted on it. And actually it was not very prominent, and no one really knew actually what we are doing here. Okay, international health regulation, not much attention. Somewhere 11 p.m. at night it was voted in parliament or something. And it was implemented that way. I mean, we do have international harbors, we do have international airports, but really looking to, are they meeting the standards that actually are there for international airports and harbors? The answer is no. And I would say, if it is not even in Europe or Germany or other countries the case, I'm not too sure if it is in too many others. So it's about implementation too. And implementation means that there can be just a committee from abroad coming into your country and checking if you meet the obligations you've made. With WTO, we know, for example, that there are sanctions in place once you don't meet the rules. If you don't abide to the rules, stick to the rules. For the WHO and the whole framework, we don't have that. So we have no right tool in place to if a country does not cooperate, to really let it feel it. And that is something we need too, from my perspective. And for that, again, it would be better to have a real new treaty to discuss this new balance of obligations and control of it. And I was wondering if something like Ebola or coronavirus had, for the first time, this outbreak had started in Germany, would we have let a committee and experts from abroad immediately or not? Of course, I would say yes, but you never know how that debate would go then. So actually, that is what we need. That there is a real commitment of the member states through debating and voting on this treaty, that makes a difference to the possibilities the WHO has right now. And the same counts for, there are so many fields. Data transparency, collecting data, the possibility of collecting data, and the obligation of member states actually to deliver data and to make it transparent. So there are so many areas. Of course, you could do it step by step and here a thing and there a thing. But I think after this century experience, once in a century experience, hopefully once in a century experience we make right now, after this we should use and have to use this momentum to really have a new setup of the WHO.
Thank you. So a whole number of the things that have been discussed, like compliance, transparency, etc. And we'll see at the end of November what the member states decide. Can I just add a small question there? You will be taking up the G7 presidency, I mean, not you personally, but Germany, next year. You've mentioned that, we've had a lot of statements from G7, G20, from everywhere. What would be your wish and expectations? There'll be a change of government, but what will be your wish and expectations there?
Well, actually, what we advocate for, what I advocate for, wherever I'm representing Germany in these international gatherings, is that we don't open up too many different strings and institutions, but that we really focus on WHO. And we had, during our presidency within the European Union, we have managed, it was some work to do too, to develop a common position of the 27 member states of the European Union for WHO reform. And even for that, you already had to find some compromises and some wording that actually made it possible that everyone goes with us, but it was possible. And we have a Franco-German non-paper on this too, and that is what we bring into G7, G20. What I find important is just to be consistent, that in all these different international fora, Germany is together with the partners advocating for the same and not for something different depending on the forum we are. And our consistent message is let's focus on WHO, improve WHO, governance, funding, or whatever there is on the table, but not to build up too many additional institutions or bodies or whatever. Boards. There are so many ideas. And so every presidency wants to develop something new. We had that discussion now with some G7 and G20 presidencies. And I say, of course, it's always good to invent something new. But actually, we have there something in place. Let's focus on that one.
Sorry, over to you, I think.
Yes, thanks.
Nicely.
Thanks very much. We have questions really starting to flow in online, and just to let you know, this is the last question that we will be posing as moderators. We'll be turning to the floor after this last one. And what I'd like to do is begin, indeed, looking a little bit further into the future. I think it's fair to say that over the last 10 years or so, Germany has really increased its role in global health, its leadership, its visibility, politically, financially. I think it's really quite widely recognized as a leader in this area. And I think the world has also in many ways appreciated a very steady hand at the helm with your chancellor, who has been, I think, widely praised for her handling of the pandemic, both domestically as well as internationally. She's been a steady hand, not just in health, but in a wide range of foreign policy areas at a time when the world has been quite turbulent in terms of political leadership of other major powers. This may all come to an end in September with your elections. What would you say, how strong and deeply rooted, for example, among parliamentarians, among civil society, how strong is that commitment to Germany's leadership role in global health? What might happen in September? And how much of this commitment is linked to, I think, a very well-respected, widely respected leader? Can we expect some further turbulence in the months ahead?
Well, one thing will end for sure. That's Angela Merkel being the chancellor by her own decision in September. But there is a deep root of this commitment to an engagement in global health of Germany within parliament, within society, within government, and actually seeing the approach of almost, not all, but almost all parties that actually includes high-level attention on global health issues. And what I keep on telling the German people too is, it's not just because, I mean, that's already important enough. It's not just because of humanitarian reasons. That would be already reason enough, but it's not only because of that. We do it in our own national interest. It's in our own interest to be engaged there, because you see, I mean, Ebola, SARS-CoV-1, swine flu, now this pandemic situation with the coronavirus, COVID-19, actually you see that with this, and we are one of the most interconnected nations of the world. I mean, we are exporting to the whole world in the middle of a continent, interlinked with so many other countries. So of course, everything that happens somewhere, somehow, has an impact on Germany, especially when it comes to global health and to health crises. Even migration, parts of migration are connected with the issue of universal health coverage. Is it met or not? If there is no primary health care, you might even more easily tend to leave your country. So actually, I would say it's deeply rooted in German politics, and the commitment that is there. There's even a new subcommittee in Parliament for global health. The commitment that is there will remain, and at the same time, of course, with the new government, as always, it needs to be rebuilt, kind of. But that's normal anyway. I mean, with new health ministers, of course, when I was coming into office, I had to learn all this too. And to get engaged, and that counts for every new minister. The crazy thing is, with the 27 health ministers that are there in Europe, I'm already one of the 5th longest standing. So you see actually how quick there is a change, especially in situations like this. But the policy, the root of it, I'm very sure will remain.
So we will turn to the audience. I wonder, is there any question here in the room? Ambassador Lauber, please.
Thank you very much.
The mic is coming. That's easier for the people online then. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much. I'm the Swiss ambassador to the UN in Geneva. It's a bit odd to have a Swiss ambassador here, but anyway. Minister, thank you so much for being here. Thanks you also for the staunch German support to the multilateral system, and in particular to the health pillar in that. I have 2 questions, if I may. First, on COVAX, can you share your assessment on the success of this? As Germany, Switzerland supports it very much, but there are, of course, growing pains. Especially middle-income countries have a bit of a disappointment. Do you think it's a model that works, that will work also for the future? And then the second question, the heightened political interest, now you mentioned it yourself, for international global health issues, and I'm glad you mentioned the danger of multiplication and fragmentation of the system, and that we need to be careful to put WHO really at the center. There's also another tension. There's a tension, and I'm speaking as a member of the foreign ministry, between foreign ministries and health experts. How do we strike the right balance to keep the political momentum, but make sure that when we go into the negotiations of a treaty, that the actual experts we need are here and really make this treaty successful, addressing the substance? Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, on COVAX, I think the notion you just mentioned that is there is actually understandable, because we have the same expectation, and it still needs to be at least improved. It's becoming better in the past weeks, but during the past weeks. But when, where, which quantity, why? Where goes which quantity of doses? When, to which country, why? That is so far not really, it's not very transparent so far. And so actually we have committed 2.2 billion to ACTA, most of it to COVAX. And many other countries have too, and of course there's an expectation actually, at least of transparency, and that transparency is expected of course by those countries that are desperately waiting for doses too. And as I said, it's getting better, but we are not yet there where we would wish to be, to really have a kind of metrics or kind of framework where you could understand what when. By the way, we have committed 30 million doses at least to COVAX. In August, we will start to deliver the first ones to COVAX. The first, I would say, perhaps even millions in August and September doses, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson to COVAX. But then, of course, we'd love to know where it goes to. Second issue, you know, it's of course a challenge for a government itself to coordinate. I mean, we have the leading role for WHO in the health ministry, but of course colleagues in foreign ministry are interested too in all these issues. And so it's very important to just coordinate. And what we have developed as a federal government in Germany, I don't know, for 10 years ago for the first time, is a global health action plan. Actually, you were part of the advisory board now to actually have an update that was just in cabinet. When was it? Some months ago, October, we updated our global health strategy, and so the foreign ministry, the ministry for economic cooperation and development, the health ministry, all the other ministries. By the way, even research, our research ministry is financing some research hubs too internationally. So actually, we need to coordinate, and we do this through this global health strategy, so that the foreign experts and the health experts of the government actually have the same direction and the same issues on the agenda. But you're right, every now and then between the different ministries in a government, especially when it comes to international bodies like this, it can be challenging.
Actually, there was a meeting of the state secretaries, all the state secretaries, yesterday, I think, to discuss global health and the global health strategy. And with the new global health strategy, that is a regular feature that has been introduced. I think you have something similar in Switzerland. And as you and as Gaudenz Silberschmidt knows, we looked at the Swiss experience very carefully and learned a lot. Suri, you probably have some questions from the web.
Indeed, the questions are now coming in fast and furious, so I'm going to try to pull together themes from a few of them to try to get as many of them addressed as possible. There are a number of questions around vaccines and intellectual property, so I'll come back to that just for a moment. I think we have a commentator who's asking, you know, why is the discussion only about vaccines? I think in your response to my question about the TRIPS waiver, you spoke a lot about tech transfer for vaccines, but we know that intellectual property also matters for diagnostics and for drugs. I think that when you were speaking about the expectations of the German government as a funder of R&D, are those expectations enough, for example, to have companies cooperating, to have companies, for example, contributing to intellectual property pools, such as that set up by the World Health Organization? Is it enough to have an expectation, or is there a need to have something a little bit harder, a requirement, let's say?
Well, first of all, of course, if the expressed expectation doesn't lead to anything, then you do the next step, of course, as a government and as politics. But as I said, in the special regard of cooperation in the area of vaccine production, COVID-19 vaccine production, I really do see this will of cooperation by the companies, and not just the will. I mean, they are, even voluntary licensing is not just discussed, it's put in place with other companies on the world. And somehow they even have to, because these small, actually it is startups, all 3 mRNA developing companies are startups. So they do need cooperation, actually, to have a worldwide network of distribution, but as well of production. But yes, of course, if the expectation that you express as a government that has funded the company, and the company is in your country, and you have this pandemic situation and the worldwide need, of course, just expressing the expectation and nothing happens would not be enough. We would do different steps if we did not see actually that there is movement. But there is movement, so actually we should focus on getting it done. And that is, for example, that is why when President Macron was in Pretoria in South Africa, everyone was a bit wondering in South Africa why he did bring a German minister. And we were a bit wondering too at the very beginning, but then, of course, it was a good signal of French-German partnership and working together, cooperation. But at the same time, it was the signal of these 2 countries and the European Union to South Africa, to the president who is advocating in these issues, and to the whole continent, to the African Union. We want this cooperation. We are funding it. We brought money. We brought cooperation partner, and now it's almost on daily base. It's discussed and hopefully soon implemented and starting. So yes, that of course there needs to lead to something, the expression of expectations. The other one was, of course, it's not just about vaccines. It's about therapeutics and diagnostics too, and that is why ACTA was not just focusing on vaccines, which is good. Of course, most of the money goes there too, but not all of it. And we are supporting financially to research on therapeutics, COVID-19. Obviously, it's harder to find and to develop a therapeutic than a vaccine. But it comes with the same expectation. I mean, I had some calls, like many others, with Gilead on remdesivir when it was there for the first time, and it was very hard to get it out of the US. I would say not because of Gilead, but nevertheless, of course, that's a discussion too. Regarding diagnostics, I would say, meanwhile, they've really become much more affordable. I mean, if I compare the prices and the pricing of diagnostics 12 months ago and now, of course we still need to share, and we do, but still the price there, the market really worked. Because, you know, many parts of it is once the technology is there, it's production that has scale. Can be scaled up easily, more easily than vaccine production. And so for diagnostics, I would say actually we are on very good track. For vaccines, I would say in 12 months from today's time, we will really wonder how much has happened, quicker than ever before. For therapeutics, that's hard to say where this leads to, but we support it wherever we can.
So I'm looking into the group here. The gentleman in the center here, please.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Schneider from the GCSP. I have a question regarding resilience. I think we have all seen that many states have not been well prepared, although there have been also forecasts that there will happen something like that. Where do you see the biggest need in Germany and globally, where we have to strengthen resilience on a state level and on a society level? Thank you.
Well, there are several areas where we already actually have started at least to learn some lessons. You know, in the German debate, there's a meanwhile, I would say, even a little bit famous report to the Parliament of 2012, actually, that had different scenarios. By the way, the scenario of flooding, because that's very hard to see now, these pictures from back home, from North Rhine-Westphalia and Rheinland-Pfalz. This report was focusing on several scenarios of catastrophes that could happen. And the pandemic scenario, compared to what really happened, one of these scenarios is very similar to what we have seen, and still we were not prepared. Why? It was there, it was even a bit discussed, but there were no action taken. One action, obviously, is not just having plans. Every hospital in Germany, every bigger company, every federal state had to have a pandemic plan, but no one really trained it. It was just written somewhere, and no one knew actually where it was. And so we need to train it like we do fire training or other trainings. A second is stockpiling. If you really, and the world is in need and the markets are going Wild West, obviously it's very expensive if you get anything at all, and if it just comes to protective masks, if you remember that. So we built up a national stockpiling for health protection, and we want to interlink it with a European one, so that not all of the 27 countries do the same. That's a discussion. We start now national, but of course there's a discussion on the European level. And we try to interlink it with other preparedness mechanisms we have for other catastrophes. Of course, for defense, for other catastrophes, we just have different stockpilings, and we need to better connect it, and we try to bring this together into one authority, one administration, perhaps even, and that's a discussion between the Defense Ministry and Ministry of the Interior and us and others to better coordinate there. The dependency on China, it's a very fundamental issue. It's much more than just preparedness for a pandemic situation, but these not being sovereign enough to solve this as a European Union or as Europe actually shows us that when it comes to research, I mean, just imagine a world where vaccines just would have been developed by China and Russia and no other country that would even have the route to really change the world, perhaps even. And so, like you would never give defense industry, all the defense industry to China or wherever, to Asia, just because it's cheaper. You always want to keep the core of the defense industry in your country, or at least in the European Union. We have some certain other areas of security, and this is health security, where we need to define what needs to be and to remain or come back within the European Union, research capacities, vaccine production capacities. We just started it last week, that is just doing a procurement for a capacity of 500 million doses per year, a 5 years contract, and companies that do apply now for it, actually we pay a fee and they have to give us that capacity as soon as we need it. When we say now we need it, they have to give that capacity to us to scale up production in times of when we need it. By the way, for Ebola already it could have made a difference. It's not just for us, it could be for other parts of the world too. So there are several areas: stockpiling, capacity, sovereignty, emergency plans that need to be trained, just to name 3 of them, where we already start the lesson learned process, not just by writing it down, but by really implementing it. And of course, there's still many, many more areas. But one thing is true, the next pandemic, of course, will not just be the same, I'm very sure. I don't know how you see it or you, but of course, it just won't happen just the same way. There will be something different. Perhaps it becomes even harder, and it is with bacteria instead of a virus.
We have, I think, time for one more question. So I'm going to combine again a preoccupation that I see with at least a few commentators about the risk of distraction. In your opinion, is there a risk, or how great is the risk, I should say, that
the risk of?
A risk of distraction, that an increased attention on health security concerns, for example, may distract from the previous emphasis on universal health coverage, for example? What is the risk that focusing on reforms, a pandemic treaty, other kinds of proposals that are now on the table to try to strengthen the global system, what is the risk that distracts us from a very urgent ongoing situation? We are far from out of this pandemic, of course. So what do you see as the magnitude of those risks for Germany? How do you propose to handle them? Do you think we can, in fact, walk and chew gum at the same time, as we say?
Well, of course there is this risk. I mean, you know from The Hobbit, the Eye of Mordor, and of course you can always focus on one thing. But at the same time, it's still interlinked. I mean, we have with Ghana and Norway, the Chancellor and the President of Ghana and the Prime Minister of Norway together have promoted global action plan for health, and the idea actually was to better coordinate the international organizations that we have that deal with health. That was interlinked with the Sustainable Development Goal number 3 on health, and especially universal health coverage. And what we see now in this pandemic is that a working primary healthcare system, and that is actually what we mean by universal health coverage, that everyone should at least have access to a primary healthcare system, that a working one makes a difference in a pandemic too, of course. I mean, it's not just enough to have that vaccines. That will be an issue of the next months, I'm very sure. You really need to be able to administer them, to distribute them, and then to have people on the ground wherever on the world that actually are capable and able to deliver. And that the same counts for HIV drugs. I mean, the problem is not not anymore the availability. Right now, it's actually the problem how to bring it to the people that need it. And for that, you need a working primary healthcare system. And that brings us back to resilience, by the way. Of course, that part of the resilience is not discussed in Switzerland or Germany because we are used to have a working primary healthcare system. But in a country that has not, the first and most important task for having a real resilience for pandemic or whatever health security threat is just a healthcare system that meets the primary needs. So I would say, yes, there is a risk of distraction, but at the same time, if you take a bit broader view, you see how much all of this is interlinked.
If I can just squeeze in, you want to go to the floor? Yeah.
We have the Executive Director of UNAIDS here. I would like to give her the floor since she's here with us. Please, Madam.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Honorable Minister, for coming to see us again here in Geneva, and for the leadership of the German government on global health. I'm going to put a little challenge. We've spoken before, but I'm going to put a little challenge to you, Honorable Minister. And maybe let me start by reading you some data I picked up from Africa CDC this week. Their data, they say there was an increase of, first of all, 23 African countries are experiencing the third wave of COVID. 16 countries have the Delta variant present, confirmed. There was an increase of 15% on the number of new cases in Africa last week, 15% from the previous week. Globally, it's 3%, so there's more control. Deaths have increased by 23% in the African region from one week to another. Globally, deaths are coming down by 7%, just to show you how badly hit that region is now. So here is my challenge and my dilemma. I represent people 40 years struggling with HIV/AIDS. When the antiretrovirals were first found in the West, in Europe and America, people in the South continued to die. People living with HIV organized together with gay men in America and made a global movement to demand for access to these antiretrovirals. It took 6 more years before the prices came down through generic production, and then we got the prices from $10,000 a year to $100 a year per person. 9 million people died who could be alive today. Now the survivors, those who survived that, who got the lower price in Africa, are now at a higher risk of severe disease and death to COVID. How many years will they have to fight again to have a vaccine that will protect them? It seems to me that the approach you are proposing, which is that the companies who own this technology to choose when and who to share with at the time they want to could mean that more millions of people will die. Surely, where is the role of governments here? Where is the role of the international community here? Donations, yes, you mentioned they are there and they are welcome. But it doesn't seem to me that donations will fix this. You said speed. We need speed. Now, if we're going to wait for donations, 1 billion that we heard at the G7, the world needs 13 billion. Every corner of the world needs it. Donations won't fix it. It's maximizing supply quickly. How can this happen without sharing the technology? And how can governments wait for profit seekers to decide when this will happen? That's my challenge.
Well,
Thank you, madam. Please.
No, I agree. It's about sharing technology. But the question here is how it is shared. It always brings me back to this one argument I know, but it still is valid. Just having the patent doesn't make you a vaccine producer next week. It's by far too complex. And if we see how long it takes to build up, to set up a production site, even for experienced companies, then I would say if you really want to share, it needs cooperation in sharing, tech transfer of expertise. And I absolutely agree with you, we really need to scale up. But we are, and they are on the way to scale up. I mean, the first 10, 20, I mean, it has taken some time to produce the first 50 million doses. But we will see, I don't know how many billion produced already this year, and especially next year. And as I said, perhaps I'm wrong, I might be wrong. But from today's point of view and what I see going on worldwide, I actually see there is an overcapacity developing for mRNA technology because there's almost no country on the world that right now tries to build capacities up there, which, as I said, is okay, but that actually shows how much this is different this time to the experience you so rightly have described of the HIV experience. It took too long back then, by far. And perhaps it took too long because the urgent threat that some countries had to suffer and still are suffering was not suffered that way in the countries that had the drug. I would even say if the Ebola outbreak had taken place somewhere in Europe, perhaps the Ebola vaccine would have been there many, many years earlier. I don't know, but that's my guess. So for the first time in the history of humankind, we have a vaccine available while the pandemic is still ongoing. That never has been the case before. So that's a huge achievement. And now we will, and you asked for how long will it take? I'm very sure it will take, I don't know, 1 to 2 years maximum. And we do everything to make it quicker. Affordable, the pricing is an issue, and for that actually we have founded COVAX. And that is the reason why Germany and others, not just Germany, many, many others are so much committed. The pricing and the affordability and the availability. It needs, of course, to be, and both will be reached in a record time. And you still might say not quick enough, and I would and have to accept it, but I would say at least record time.
Thank you, Minister. I'm very sorry to those who still want to speak, both online and here, but we have already taken longer than we had originally planned. Thank you very much for coming, for your questions. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for answering them. And there is an ongoing lively debate on these issues, and I'm sure we will be discussing them in an ongoing way also here at the Global Health Center and the Graduate Institute and in our countries and other organizations. And they will come up again and again also in relation to the treaty discussions as we move forward. So I hand over to Suri to perhaps close this session.
Yes, let me echo Lona's thanks to you, Minister Spahn, to our colleagues, Olaf and the whole team at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, to my colleagues at the Global Health Center and more broadly at the Graduate Institute. Pulling off a hybrid event is far more difficult, actually, than in a fully in-person or online event. We are learning as we go. So thank you particularly to our online and in-person audience. Really fabulous to see all of you. And I hope we can have many, many more opportunities to engage and to open up debates on global health in the future. Thank you very much.